Hey everyone, it's Ellen here and welcome back to another Friday FAQ. The other day I was replying to some of my YouTube comments when I came across this one, and they were basically asking me for the D chord. How do you only strum those bottom 4 strings? Because it's sometimes really hard to avoid certain strings when you're strumming. So I came up with 3 tips that I'd like to share with you on that, so let's jump into it. So the first tip I have for you guys is to prioritize. When you are picking up a new instrument like guitar for the first time, there are so many things that you have to learn before you can play through a song smoothly, and I know that's usually people's number one goal. So just remember that out of all the things that you have to learn, there are things that are more important than strumming the correct strings every time you play a chord. For instance, you want to make sure you have those chords memorized and you want to be able to transition between them. You want to build up your calluses so that your fingers don't hurt so much when you press down on those strings anymore. Those are all things that you should focus on as a beginner first. That being said, if you do have all of those things under your belt and you are moving on to focusing on your strumming hand and you are finding it hard to avoid certain strings when you're strumming, that does lead me into my other 2 tips. So let's go ahead and jump into tip number 2. So tip number 2 is to use your thumbs, and I do mean both thumbs on both hands. Each one can help you figure out which strings to strum whenever you're doing a D chord or a similar chord. So let's zoom in so I can show you. Alright guys, so I've zoomed in a little bit, so let's go ahead and talk about this. If you have your D chord on and you're trying to not strum the bottom 2 strings, something you can easily do is take your thumb that's wrapped around the neck of your guitar. You just want to pull it up a little bit and barely touch that low E string. So you can see when I don't have it like that, it's ringing out, but if you reach around and just barely touch it just a little, it's enough to mute that string, so when you strum the rest of the chord, you won't hear that string. So for example, I'm going to strum all 6 strings, but it still sounds like a D chord because I'm muting that string. If you have bigger hands than me or like longer thumbs than me, you can also do both of these low E and A strings to mute it. However, if you do play this open A string when you're strumming the D chord, it actually sounds pretty good because A is part of the D triad, so you could strum all 5 of those if you wanted. And similarly, this thumb trick also works for other chord shapes where you want the bottom string to be muted, such as C, so you can kind of wrap it around, barely touch it, and mute that bottom string. So with that being said, let's go ahead and switch over from our left thumb to our right thumb. Alright guys, so something that I came across when I was learning guitar is I actually did not use a pick at first when I was learning guitar. I was using my fingers to strum. And something that I found was really helpful for me when doing this was that you can feel where the strings are with your thumb, because it's more tangible, right? Like you can actually feel the difference between strumming 6 strings and 4 strings and 5 strings and things like that. So if you're having trouble with the pick whenever you're trying to only strum certain strings, try not using the pick and just use your fingers. I think for me, it's a lot easier to like feel where you're strumming with your other thumb. So try strumming with your thumb instead of the pick and see if that helps. Alright guys, and my third and last tip on this is about muscle memory. I say this all the time when I talk about learning guitar. A lot of it is just being able to do things without actively thinking about them because you have developed the muscle memory that it takes to play something proficiently. So basically what I mean by this is with enough practice time, you will develop, the feeling of how to play certain things. This also includes how to avoid the strings that you're not trying to strum. Now, with that being said, there are some things that you can kind of consciously be aware of when you're practicing. So for example, you want to make sure that you already have your chords memorized on your left hand so you can really take your eyes and focus on your right strumming hand and kind of like see the difference between when you're strumming different chords. Things like the angle that you're holding your pick at when you're strumming, and even like how, widely you're using your elbow and wrist to strum a chord. Those are all things that kind of contribute to being able to play only the correct strings. So for instance, if I'm playing a 6-stringed chord like G, I tend to start my strumming hand right up here, strum all the way down because I know I'm strumming all 6 strings. But if I'm doing something like D where I'm only strumming the bottom 4, I start my strumming hand a little bit lower on the guitar. Because it's just like, again, muscle memory, right? Like I'm used to doing that after all these years, that when I strum D, I have a little bit less of a motion, whereas G has a more of a bigger motion, okay? And all of that is just kind of goes into practice, how much time you've practiced and how much time you've spent focusing on something like this. Something else that I would suggest doing is closing your eyes whenever you practice these types of chords so that you kind of can really concentrate on where your strumming hand is starting and what it feels like to strum each of those different chord shapes. Alright guys, so those are my top 3 tips on what to do to practice strumming only the correct strings. But you have to remember that the #1 thing is to always have fun. Do not let this be something that hold you back from progressing on your guitar journey. This is not the most important thing to focus on as a beginner, so please take my word for that. But also, on top of that, as with every other musical instrument, it all boils down to how much you practice. All of your practice time is really going to reinforce that muscle memory, which is going to make everything a little bit easier. So unfortunately, that is what I want to leave you with. You just gotta practice, practice, practice. But I know you guys can do it because you are awesome. And if you have any other questions that you have about how to play your guitar, make sure to leave it in a comment below so that I can feature you in a future Friday FAQ. But again, thanks for watching. I hope this helped, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!